The Blue Hands is a spooky legend for kids about a brave young man who meets a stranger on All Saints' Eve. In the little town of Huelamo in Spain, it was the night of All Saints. This was the dreaded eve when the paths of the dead and the living are said to cross. On this night, it is believed that the dead rise from their graves and walk the earth while mortal men pay their respects by keeping on their guard and remaining indoors. Instead of being at home, a brash young man named Jose Manuel was walking around the town. He had no fear of ghosts and scoffed at the old legends, saying that it was all a hoax and men were foolish to be afraid of things they had never seen. Jose and his friend Esteban were rivals in love, both vying for the affections of one pretty young girl in their village. On the night of All Saints, Jose made a bet with his friend. They agreed that if Jose was brave enough to stay out all night and not return to his house before dawn, Esteban would have to give up his pursuit of the girl. Jose was determined to win the bet, and his bravery and recklessness knew no bounds. At about 4 a.m., he was walking through the town square when he spotted a man lurking in the shadows. The stranger was pale and thin and dressed in a long, stylish black coat. His collars were drawn up around his face, obscuring his features. As Jose Manuel passed by, the stranger called out to him in a very polite voice and asked if he knew the way to La Serna. The night was quiet and Jose was bored, so he told the man that the town he was looking for was not very far from Huelamo and offered to show him the way. The stranger readily agreed, and together, they set off on their journey. They traversed the empty streets of the town, passed through the deserted lanes until they finally found themselves on the desolate, rocky road that led to La Serna. Throughout all this time, the stranger did not utter a word, and Jose Manuel was becoming a little uneasy. He did not dare to break the ominous silence that hung over them. The man exuded an odd, unearthly presence. As they were passing by a place known as the Alto de la Horca, Jose happened to steal a glance at his companion and was shocked by what he saw. For a moment, he thought his eyes must be deceiving him. Underneath the man's cloak, it seemed as if he could make out a very faint blue flame covering his fingers. "That's impossible," he told himself. "It must be some kind of strange optical illusion caused by the light of the moon. Or perhaps exhaustion is taking its toll on my mind and causing me to imagine things." Despite his uneasiness, he refocused his attention on the dark road. They continued to walk, following the path in mutual silence. However, Jose couldn't help but steal another glance at his companion. When he did, he realized with horror that the blue flames were now engulfing the man's hands and feet. Instead of disappearing, the effect had been increasing, and there seemed to be no rational explanation for it. For the first time in his life, Jose was experiencing real fear. His mind began working overtime in order to come up with a plan. He stopped suddenly and told the stranger that he needed to go to the toilet and couldn't hold it any longer. "Wait here," said Jose, trying to hide his terror. "I'll be back in a moment." "Very well," replied the stranger in a commanding voice. "I will allow it, but do not take long. You had better be back before you hear 3 claps. I dislike waiting. Clap. 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 And no more." Jose ran behind a clump of bushes by the side of the road. There, he heard the first clap. Hidden by the darkness, he waited until the stranger wasn't looking and took off running. Dashing down the road at high speed, he didn't dare look back. In the distance, he heard a second clap. By the time he reached the village, he heard a third clap. Turning around, he realized that the stranger was hot on his heels. His feet were not moving, he was just gliding through the air and gaining quickly. The flaming blue hands were reaching out to grab him. Jose was so startled, he let out a scream and began to run even faster. When he reached his house, he ran inside and slammed the door behind him. Within seconds, he heard a loud bang as the malevolent entity collided with the door of his home. Exhausted and terrified, Jose Manuel dropped to the floor and listened as the thing outside began banging and scraping at the door. Then, he heard a growling voice say, "This time, your feet have saved you. Otherwise, I would have drunk your blood." After all was calm. Lying on the floor, Jose fell into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, when the sun rose, Jose awoke to hear the laughter of children coming from the street. He wondered if what he had experienced the night before had all just been a nightmare. When he looked outside, he noticed 2 blue handprints seared into the wood of the front door. Never again would Jose Manuel leave his house for any reason. He became a shut-in and lived in fear that the man with blue hands would come back to drink his blood. He spent the rest of his days a virtual captive in his own home. Everyone thought he was crazy, and not one person ever believed his story. The Dark Castle is a spooky story about a man who buys an eerie painting of a Scottish castle with one solitary light in the window. There was a man who enjoyed collecting antiques. On weekends, he would often drive to a small town nearby and search the side streets for a new antique shop. In one dingy little store, his eye was caught by a strange old framed picture. He picked it up and dusted it off. It was a painting of a dark castle that stood on a barren, wind-swept hill. Although the scene was gloomy and melancholy, something about it fascinated him. As he gazed at the painting, it gave him an eerie, unsettling feeling. Then, he noticed something strange. The entire castle was in bathed darkness except for one small light in the window high up in the tall, stone tower. The man wondered why anyone would paint an ancient castle with a light in only one window. Intrigued by the strange painting, he asked the shopkeeper if he could tell him anything about it. All the old man knew was that it was a painting of a Scottish castle. The man bought the old painting and took it home with him. That evening, he hung it over the fireplace in his home. There was no signature and no date on the picture, but when he was dusting it off, he found a small Latin inscription printed at the corner of the frame. He wrote it down and immediately called a friend of his who understood Latin. When he found out what the inscription meant in English, he was puzzled. The phrase was, "Every century, it shall be dark." This inscription made little sense to him and, after a while, he just forgot about it. The painting hung in the man's home for many months. Whenever he held a party and invited friends over for dinner, he showed them the mysterious painting. It made a good conversation piece. Everyone who saw it was tempted to speculate about why only one small window in the castle's tower was lighted. One evening, the man was showing the painting to some of his guests when he noticed something that shocked him. Staring at the painting in disbelief, he realized that the window in the tower was dark. He examined it closely, but the black paint on the window was as old and as cracked as the paint on the rest of the picture. There was no sign that it had ever been touched. It made his skin crawl. After his guests had left, the man went to bed, still puzzled by the strange alteration to the mysterious painting. However, when he woke up the next morning and took a look at the painting, he saw that the window in the tower was lighted again. A chill ran down his spine. Then, he remembered the Latin inscription. "Every century, it shall be dark." He made a note of the date and began to do some serious research into the history of every Scottish castle and the legends associated with them. Eventually, he discovered the following strange tale. The Dark Castle had belonged to an evil character who had 2 sons. He hated his eldest son and kept him locked up in the dark and dreary tower while his younger son lived in comfort and enjoyed all the wealth and pleasures he could give him. After years of suffering, the imprisoned elder son had died in the little room high in the tower. The date of his death was exactly 500 years before the night when the painted window had gone dark. The Hairy Woman is a scary story about a man who encounters a female Bigfoot. Once upon a time, a man was out hunting in the wilderness. He got lost and was wandering about aimlessly, unable to find his way home. He wandered for days and days until he was so weak and hungry he couldn't walk any longer. It was growing dark. Night was falling, it began to get very cold. The man noticed a big hole in the rocks. It was a deep, dark cave and he crawled inside to get warm. He gathered some leaves for a pillow, then curled up in a corner of the cave and fell asleep. In the middle of the night, he was awoken by a strange noise. It seemed to be coming from the back of the cave. The man sat up and listened. He heard a loud chomp, chomp, chomp as if something was chewing on something. The man turned on his flashlight and was shocked to see a huge hairy woman crouching there. She was completely naked and her body was covered from head to toe in dark hair. She was munching on the carcass of a large deer, pulling off the legs, tearing off the meat and eating it raw. The man was afraid at first, but the hairy woman didn't attack him. She just continued eating. After a while, she tore a leg off the deer and offered it to him. The man was very hungry, so he nervously accepted it. He got up, collected some dry sticks and built a small fire at the mouth of the cave. Then, he roasted the meat over the fire until it was cooked and ate it. The man stayed in the cave with the hairy woman for a few more days. She would go out hunting and come back with a deer carcass. She dug into the deer's hide with her big long fingernails and skinned it. Then, she tore the carcass to pieces with her powerful hands. The man would take the big pieces of deer meat and roast them over a fire. After several days, the hairy woman learned how to roast the meat herself. She got so used to eating roasted meat that she wouldn't eat it raw anymore. The man stayed in the cave through the winter. The hairy woman got pregnant and gave birth to a little baby boy. One side of it was hairy and the other side was normal. One time, after the hairy woman left to go hunting, the man followed her to see what she was doing. He went out to the edge of the cliff and looked down. He saw 2 or 3 dozen hairy people coming up the hill. The hairy woman was pushing them back. They wanted to see what was in the cave and she wouldn't let them. The man was scared to death. He was afraid the hairy people were going to kill him. The hairy woman made them go back down the mountain and the man was very relieved. Eventually, the man decided he had to leave the cave and go back home. He began to build a small boat that would be able to take him down the river. When his boat was ready, the man didn't tell the hairy woman he was going to leave. He just ran down to the water's edge, jumped into the boat and set sail. As he was drifting away, the hairy woman came running. She was clutching her child in her arms. She started crying and hollering, wanting him to stay. "No, I'm tired of living in a cave," the man said. "I'm going back to civilization again." When she realized he was leaving for good, the hairy woman grabbed the child, tore it in half and threw the hairy part at him. The man sailed on and left the hairy woman standing there, clutching the other half of her child. The face cloth is a story about a miserly old man who beats his servants and gets what he deserves in the end. Long ago, there was an old man who loved money more than anything else. He never spent a penny and refused to give money to others who were down on their luck. He lived in a big old house with his miserable wife. They had no children. The old man refused to employ any servants because hated to part with money. Instead, he forced his wife to do all the cooking and cleaning herself. In time, his wife grew so old and feeble she had to have help. At first, the old man was angry with his wife and said she was just being lazy. But his wife still couldn't manage to do all the work herself, no matter how hard she tried. Finally, the old man decided he would never get his meals on time unless he hired a servant girl, so at last he did. The girl tried her best to serve her master faithfully, but she soon found that nothing she did pleased the man. The crack of his whip was heard throughout the house, and night after night he beat the girl so badly that she fell asleep crying. The old man's wife heard the pitiful cries, but she said nothing and did nothing, for she was afraid of her husband. One day, a barefooted beggar turned up on the old man's doorstep. The beggar was starving and desperate for food. "Master of the house," he called out. "Please bring me something to eat. I am starving." It happened that only the servant girl was home that morning. She felt sorry for the beggar, and she gave him a bag of rice she had taken for herself from the cupboard. "Take this rice," she said, "but hurry away before my master comes back. There will be trouble if he sees you here. He is evil." The beggar took the bag of rice and thanked the girl for her kindness. In return, he gave her a face cloth. It looked like a humble gift, but the beggar assured her that it was far more remarkable than it seemed. "Wash your face with this face cloth every day," he told her, "and you will become more beautiful than you ever dreamed. But be sure no one else ever uses it." The girl slipped the face cloth into her pocket, just in time, as the old man and his wife returned. Her master was so furious to find a beggar at their door that he chased him away with a stick. Then he beat the servant girl for talking to the beggar. The girl fled to her room to wash away her tears with the face cloth. Not only did the pain mysteriously vanish, but she grew more beautiful. The scars from her frequent beatings miraculously vanished. The old man wondered why the servant girl looked prettier each day despite the beatings. "Tell me your secret," he demanded. But the girl didn't want to tell him about the face cloth, for she knew he would beat her even harder if he learned about the rice she had given to the beggar. And what if he took the face cloth away? The girl endured her daily beatings silently, but one day she forgot and pulled out the face cloth while the old man was watching her. He tore it out of her hands and insisted that she tell him everything. When he learned that the beggar had given her the face cloth in return for free food, the old man said the face cloth belonged to him. "Everything in this house belongs to me, including the rice you gave away and the face cloth you got in return." But the beggar said no one else should use it, the girl cried. The old man paid no attention. When the girl wept that night, she had nothing to wash away her tears and pain. Nor could she sleep, for she had failed to keep her face cloth safe. What if her master used it? Would her luck turn even worse? The next morning, the old man hurried to the wash basin so he could use the face cloth himself. He wanted his looks to improve as much as the servant girl's, so he washed his face repeatedly. But each time he lowered the face cloth, his wife's eyes opened wider. He thought she was impressed to see him become so handsome. In truth, her eyes were wide with horror, for she saw what the face cloth had done. But as always, she said nothing. The old man handed the face cloth to her. "I want a beautiful wife and I don't want to pay for plastic surgery," he said. "Use this face cloth and make yourself beautiful." She held it between two fingertips as if it might bite her. "What are you waiting for?" he shouted, picking up the whip he used on the servant girl. His wife, who never disobeyed him before, dropped the face cloth and hurried out of the room. He could not understand her odd behavior. But when he stooped to pick up the face cloth, he saw before him a clawed and hairy hand. He rushed to the mirror. Staring back at him was a strange beast with bloodshot eyes, sharp fangs, and matted hair. The Shrunken Head is a spooky story about a boy who is kidnapped and wakes up in a strange place with a very odd companion. The 9-year-old boy felt uneasy. He was traveling on his own for the first time and had to admit that he was a little scared. He was on the way to his grandmother's house, taking a train. The boy's parents had reluctantly agreed to let him go on his own, and he set forth to visit his grandmother. There was a man sitting beside him on the train. The man struck up a conversation with the boy and offered him some candy. Happily, the young boy accepted the stranger's kind offer. But when he started chewing the candy, it tasted bitter. Then he began to feel very strange. The train carriage began to swim before his eyes and he felt lightheaded and sleepy. He couldn't keep his eyes open and before long, he drifted off into a heavy slumber. When the boy woke up, he found himself in a large room with stone walls. There were bookcases lined up against the walls and a large door at one end of the room. He ran to the door and tried to open it. He tugged at the handle only to find that it was firmly locked from the outside. He pounded the door with his fists and called for help, but no one answered. Suddenly, he heard an eerie voice coming from somewhere inside the room. "Get out of here while you still can," it whispered. The boy spun around and saw a sight so shocking that he almost fainted. On the other side of the room, sitting on a table, was a tiny shrunken head. It had been severed from its body and boiled until it shrunk down to the size of a baseball. The boy couldn't believe that the shrunken head was speaking to him. "Who are you?" cried Joseph. "For years ago, I was a young boy, just like you," said the head. "I was happy and carefree until that man kidnapped me. He brought me to this place and trapped me in this room. He's the reason I'm stuck here on this table. He's the reason I'm a shrunken head. He's an evil man and he practices black magic." The boy shuddered. "What happened?" "For weeks, he left me here alone. Then on my 10th birthday, the man came back. First he cut off my head. Then he placed it in a pot of boiling water until it shrunk like a shriveled prune. Then the man wrote a spell on a piece of parchment and placed it under my tongue. That evil black magic spell ensures that I know all and see all. All the secrets of the universe are revealed to me. But it also forces me to serve that evil man and reveal those secrets to him. But because I know all and see all, I know that a shrunken head has only a limited lifespan. 4 years. My lifespan is almost up and now the man needs a new shrunken head." The boy felt like his heart had dropped into his stomach. "The man wants to kill me and turn me into a shrunken head," he moaned. "That's why he brought me to this terrible place." "Obviously," said the head. "But it's not too late for you to escape. See the bookcase behind you? Push hard on the 3rd shelf and it will expose a secret passage." Joseph pushed on the shelf and was amazed to see the bookcase swing back, revealing a dark passage. He was about to rush in when the head called him back. "Wait. If you don't take me with you, I'll be forced to tell him how you escaped and where you can be found. Take me with you and I can guide you to freedom." The boy went back to the table and gently lifted the horrible head. He tucked it under his arm, entered the dark passage, and pulled the bookcase shut behind him. As he stood trembling in the darkness, the head whispered to him. "Count 100 stairs," the shrunken head told him. "Then feel for a door." Joseph felt like his feet were rooted to the floor until he heard terrible demonic voices crying out, searching for him. He frantically felt for the edge for the step with his foot and moved into the darkness below him. His fingers ached from clutching the shrunken head. The only thing worse than carrying it would be dropping it and letting it roll down the steps, leaving him alone in that terrible darkness. He continued down, trying to shut out the demon's voices, trying to remember to count. When he reached the 100th step, his legs were quivering. His hand felt for a door and found it. Just as he turned the knob, he heard a demonic voice so close behind him that it made his ears ache. He jumped through the doorway and the door slammed shut behind him. He found himself lying in a sunlit meadow, outside the castle. Then the shrunken head made one last request. It asked the boy to remove the parchment from his mouth, so he could finally die. The boy did as he was asked and the shrunken head breathed its last. Finally, it was out of its misery. The boy buried the head in the meadow and set off for his hometown. The boy tried to go on with his life. But for years afterwards, he was haunted by terrible nightmares. Every night, he dreamed that his head had been cut off, boiled in a big pot and left resting on a table in an empty castle. And every night, he woke up screaming.